So, what kind of image of nihilism has been portrayed by popular culture? Let me guess. A Nazi like type character passed out on a floating chair in the middle of a swimming pool next to an empty bottle of alcohol, right? Yeah. This is what has become known as the Big Lebowski Nihilism, and is largely responsible for much of the modern mainstream impression of the philosophy. According to this movie, nihilism is lazy, greedy, thuggish, criminal, fascist, and violent. This is how nihilism is depicted. And this depiction may not even be consciously in the forefront of people's mind, but nevertheless it still has an influence. Despite its possible original innocuous intent, which might be arguable, as per the perception of nihilism, this film has turned out to be a piece of pop culture propaganda of sorts, responsible for much of the contemporary characterization of nihilism with a negative connotation. Not many people would have ever even heard of nihilism if not for this film, and it does go to some length to demonize it, as if the denouncement of nihilism needed any further help, the basis of which is questionable due to the effort not really being all that warranted. Like I've said before, and as I will say again, the people that are causing all the trouble in the world are not nihilists, nor is devaluation the causation behind the trouble. The people who cause trouble are the moral crusaders and the value junkies. The quarrel is a contention among those that are invested into this game, not among those who have dropped out. The suffering of the world is sustained and propagated by those that hold the values, not by those that recognize that values are subjective. So really, what is people's problem with nihilism? I'd really like to hear the arguments, if one can be articulated. If there is more to the charge than this Big Lebowski association, then put forth your detailed critique. Beyond the perception created by this film, nihilism is still generally viewed unfavorably, so it's understandable why nihilism receives such a bad rap from society. Because most individuals and social groups invest deeply into inventory and greatly cherish their values. And on top of that, people are invested in investment and value values. When these types of values and investments are put on a pedestal and upheld as permanent fixtures, even a mere suggestion of skepticism can ruffle feathers at the least, or lead to bloodshed at the worst. The most evident example of this is found with the rejection of religion, which is probably where nihilism originally got its negative connotation, and hence became a term to malign any such dismissal of theology. Indeed, the first use of the label nihilism is attributed to Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi, who sought the promotion of faith and revelation over rationalism and critical philosophy, which in his estimation was apparently probably too dangerous to theism, since it represented the deconstruction of the credibility of the entire theological juggernaut, forever philosophically shattering its invulnerability. The impact of this fracture was carefully buffered, however, and damage control was successfully employed due to the success of the label device, which demonized the convenient scapegoat of nihilism, which served to malign anyone of such inclinations, while carefully reinforcing itself as the self-elected normative authority. And this wasn't that hard to set in motion, since by and large this world is dominated by value junkies, who far outnumber the nihilists. And throughout the history of 19th century philosophy and beyond, nihilism's role developed more and more to counter religious dogmatic assertions, and extended into general non-theological philosophy and ideology, which ultimately translated into the inevitable negation of various human investments. And hence, anything that negates must be negative, no? A negation of any human investment isn't life-affirming, right? We believes in nothings, Lebowski, nothing. And so it goes. But one of the things people will find as they look into matters more deeply, of which seems contrary, but is nevertheless the clear and present, is that not only are polarities different degrees of the same thing, that indeed opposites are the same, but that often the context of the design of a polar position may be opposite to the position. This is where you will find instances of subtraction being positive and adding being negative. So I don't think skepticism and the use of rationalism or philosophical criticism to reveal the relativity and subjectivity of human investment, while outlining the simple existential truth of reality, is inherently negative, but only characterized as such to discourage such activities. So nihilism has a constant uphill battle. And additionally, nihilism does have a further problem, in that it does seem to attract a lot of depressive or destructive personality types, which doesn't do it any favors towards its purposes. Indeed, nihilism can become profoundly misused, as it is often applied to reinforce depression for those that would indulge in bemoaning the suffering and futility of life, or towards destructive activity for those that would use the concept of the absence of objective values and morals as an excuse or justification to victimize others. But these types of behaviors are not representative of what nihilism sets out to accomplish. I would argue that rejecting aspects that have been laid down as dogmatic truths not to be questioned is a very positive endeavor. For the nature of a man's existential experience lends naturally towards exploration, questioning, and observation, and that the very awareness of a man thrives and is most alive when he is in tune with the spirit, meaning not bowing down and conforming to any pre-existing order or hierarchy which has been simply founded and supplied by other men that came beforehand. The pure potentiality of awareness of the existential experience seeks to break all boundaries and burgeon the scope of its possibility, to enrich its presence and immediacy, and guide itself naturally through spontaneous instinctual autodidacticism. These are the ways of existential being, and they lend towards autonomy and freedom, as opposed to what I would describe as the real negative facets of existentiality: conformity, blind faith, dependence, obedience, and deference via intimidation. The reason these facets are negative is because they don't fully embrace the full spectrum of potentiality. The potentiality of potentiality is not fully expressed to its fullest potential. And, of course, the kinds of positions that encompass the open possibilities of potentiality are going to be condemned by any established order, because the established order obviously doesn't want to lose its power. So it's going to demonize such activities and lambaste anyone who dares to partake in them. It makes sense. But, in truth, despite this great effort to slander and malign the truth, the qualities of existential nihilism are and remain of a positive nature, not negative. Qualities of such exemplified through creativity, dissent, innovation, self-reliance, experimentation, empiricism, and deconstruction. These are the ways towards expediting a position that, by way of which, guides awareness towards a position of being able to operate metaphysical tools. The metaphysical instrumentations of existentiality.